and welcome to Riverside Crafts. I'm Ray and I'm going to be sharing with you how I use my jelly plate today. So here we go, let's see what happens when I start to press the buttons. Okay, hopefully you can see everything all right there. I've moved the camera into place. Right, now I'm going to show you what I do with my jelly plate, and then I'm going to explain what the jelly plate is. So here's one card and I will show you how we do a basic blend. I'm going to be using inks today. So stamping and blending with your jelly plate, using stencils onto your jelly plate. Again, using stencils, but also using stencils to stamp backwards with. We should also look at reverse stamping with your jelly plate. And then these are just a couple of other samples using jelly plates because they come in all different sizes and shapes. So, what is a jelly plate? A jelly plate is this thing here. It is a little bit of a bit like jelly, like he sounds like, but it's not made from gelatin. It has it's like an elastic silicone type thing, and it's comes to you clear when you first get them. They're best to be used on a stamp block because then you've got a stable base for them. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You just wouldn't, there are all sorts out there. The circles, the big squares, and basically they are a monoblock printing system. So basically you will do whatever it is you want to do jelly plate, and then it will allow you to print once. Okay, some of the tools that you need for your jelly plate printing predominantly are going to be brayers. Now I like this sort of a brayer, mainly because it runs easy, and when I put it down I'm not sort of having to worry about it tilting up. The one thing I will say is that you need a separate brayer for your acrylic paints to when you use inks on it. This is what happens when the acrylic brayer and acrylic paints go on it. Some of them will stick to your brayer. So an old brayer is best to use for your with your acrylics, and a nice new clean shiny brayer to use with inks, and that's the one we're going to be doing today. Now I'm just going to show you this is my book. This is my learning book. This is what I do when I first got my jelly plate, when I was practicing with it to see what I could do and how things worked. This is where I started. So I'll just show you a few of the pages where I was playing. Okay, so this is where I've started with my jelly plate, and what I've done is I've written down what I used and how I did it. So I've got an idea of what it was I was looking at and playing with at the time, what inks I did, how many times I used it. So this is my diary of my jelly plate printing, to give me an idea of how things work, what colours work, what don't, with inks and with acrylic paints. So it gives me my reference book. So when I'm looking at seeing if something else will work on it, see that didn't work very well there, I wasn't happy with that one, then I can get to see what's going to happen next. So you've got different inks, using inks and acrylic paint to see where you go. Also looking at how many times you can print off of it. So this is the first generation, second, third and fourth of the, without adding anything else onto the jelly plate. Okay, so let's start off with some basic jelly plate printing. I've got my card. I have my jelly plate. Now I'm going to use Memento inks to do this. Doesn't matter, it just needs to be a water-based ink. It's just that these are nice little small ones and I'm on my small jelly plate, so it just makes life a bit easier. So I'm just going to put a little bit of ink at the top. I'm going to show you what it looks like if I just print it without brayering. So this is just as it's gone on from the ink pad without me putting a brayer across it. And I want you to see that you can see all the different, you can still see where the ink pad has hit it. It hasn't blended it through. So when you do it, if I do it again, same colour, same type of technique with the ink pen, and now I'm going to go over it with my brayer. Okay, I'm just going to go backwards and forwards. I'm not doing anything fancy, just backwards and forwards. And now I'm going to put it down. And you'll see the difference that the brayer makes when you're using it. So you get this really nice smooth finish with the brayer, whereas if you don't put it on, you're going to get this sort of mottled and you're going to see all your gaps from your ink pads. Okay, so that's just basic as to why a brayer is really useful when you're doing this sort of work. Right, now because I've just used that ink on here, I will have to wipe my brayer off because the ink will be still on there. It's amazing how far it goes. Right, now to do the sunrise type effect that I did with the first card that you saw, this one. Okay, I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm obviously going to put my 2 inks, one on the top. Let's put some white card underneath this so you can see it for a moment. There we go. And I'm going to put my other ink on the bottom on it as well. So there's my 2 inks together. Okay, I'll put them back on there for a moment. And I'm just going to go backwards and forwards with my brayer, just taking it on and giving it and smoothing it out and just moving it down gently. Right, so now when I do turn it over and print it, I've got this nice blend between my 2 colours. So one is moving into the other and I've not got that awful sort of marks. These lines and bits I get in it, I think they're quite attractive because they give me a different view, but I'm not looking at splotches of my ink. All right, so I'm wiping my ink pad. All I've got there is, it is like a J cloth. It's a and with some water on it, and I'm just going to dry my ink pad off, my brayer off, because I don't want to get too wet. Okay, so that's just a basic start with your brayer. Now you can do lots of things with it, and stencils are a really nice thing to play with it. So here we go. I'm going to put some more brighter colours on so you can see what I'm doing a bit easier. So here we go, here's a bright colour going on. Okay, now I'm going to just gently smooth that out. Now as you can see, I didn't actually clean my brayer off very well, and I've got an orangey colour coming through, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to lay my stencil on top of my jelly plate, and I'm going to press another colour through to give myself some dots, and I'm just going to go over with the brayer again just to smooth those out a bit. Okay, lift that off and I can take a print. Okay, so that is my print when I'm doing it that way, but I've got a lot of ink now on my stencil, so I'm going to turn my stencil over. I'm going to use my brayer again, and I'm just going to push down this time, so that I'm going to take a lift of ink off of my stencil. Okay, and this will give me a slightly different look when I stamp it. So now I'm getting a different vision of the same thing but in reverse. Okay, so this is a way of just using your coloured inks very simply and getting a nice effect. Okay. All right, so very mucky stencil, I do apologise. I don't clean them as often as I should do. Right, now as I said, stencils come in different shapes and sizes. This one now is my hexagon, and you can see which one I use the most. My hexagon is a lot cleaner than my square is. If I put them both on some white card, you'll see the difference. There you go, look. This one is quite grubby, but it still prints beautifully. And some of them will go a bit yellowy after a time, but it's not a problem, it's just use. Okay, so you can see which ones I've used the most, and obviously my square is the one I use most often. Right, now, one of the things I want to show you as well is repeating your work with, so you're constantly going over. I've just got to clean my brayer off, because as you can see, I've got ink all over my brayer still, so I'm just going to clean this off and dry it off on my tea towel, which is nice and clean, as I'm sure you can see. I hope you're all out there busy looking at what we're doing. I'm not seeing any comments at the moment, but that's not a problem. Hopefully we're all going all right. Hope you're having a nice Saturday. There we go. I've put my yellow on my hexagon. I'm just going to smooth it on a bit. There we go. Now I have a stencil here that's got hexagons on it, but I want to do more like a stencil lift straight away rather than doing just my colours going through. I want just the pattern of the stencils to work. Okay, so now I've put the ink directly onto my stencil this time. So I'm going to put that across my and press down. And I'm going to lift up. And I'm going to show you the second and third generations of stamping with it. So you got, this is how I did my B one. There's one. There's a second. And I don't know if I'm going to get a third off this one. No, not quite. But what I will do is I'll go back with my stencil that's still got ink on it, and I can come back in and put it on again. You see? So you can pick up your ink for quite a long time afterwards off your stencils and bring it into play. Alright, so this is just how you can print and pattern build using your stencils and your Gelli plate with basic inks. Alright, now one of the other things that I love to do with my stencils is to create pictures with it and stamping onto my Gelli plate directly with some stamps and bits. So here we go. Do this next one. Just clean up after myself quickly so I don't end up with ink everywhere and dirty hands, which is my normal. Right, put those out of the way. Now I'm gonna do myself a little picture here. So, but I want to have a sky and a ground really. So I'm going to use two colours again, like we did at the beginning when we blended them in. And we had the two, to do the sunset type thing. I'm going to do very similar. A little bit of green at the bottom. And I'm just going to blend it off. But this time I'm going down so that the green is not going to be as obvious. Right, here we go. Now I'm going to take a different ink. And this is Versaclair Fine. And this one's called Shade Lane. And I'm going to stamp some ivy on using a stamp block. I'm just going to put some ivy actually onto my Gelli plate on top of what I've already done. I'm just going to build it up so it looks like it's all sort of draping around and doing different bits here and there. Just bringing it in just down the sides a little bit more. A little bit there. There we go. I think that'll do that. So when I turn this over now, I have got a nice little glade. All right. Now in my glade, I'm going to stamp myself a fairy, which I've got here. Okay. So I'm going to put her where I think I want her, which is going to be just there. So there's my fairy there. Now I'm thinking about it. I wouldn't mind her to have a friend. Now, I'd like the friend to be looking at it, because if I stamp that again, all I'm going to get is the same image but further along. Using my Gelli plate, if I take the ink again and stamp this like so, and then stamp it onto my Gelli plate. Okay, I can turn her over and I can have my fairies looking at each other rather than being one behind the other. Okay, so that gives you a really nice technique to use with your stamps, so you can reverse stamp onto them and you've got a nice little decorative bit around the edge, which is quite a nice one to do. Okay, I'm just going to clean my ink pad again and bits. And I'll just show you. Oh, I've got fingers everywhere. Okay. So going to do a similar technique again, but this time I'm going to do a frame around the edge of what I'm working on, so you can see a slightly different finish to the work. Just got to clean my brayer off a bit because it's a bit mucky. Don't want dark green in the middle of my work. This is a nice thing to do if you wanted to make a focal point on your block. I'll show you actually. I'll do it with a circle because it looks lovely with a circle. This does. So I'll just get my circle one off. Yeah. Jelly plates come in different thicknesses as well. That doesn't particularly affect how they work or how you can use them to do what you would like. They just are, and they last a very, very long time. I've had my jelly plates now, must be 5 or 6 years, and I've not had to replace any. I don't do lots of jelly plate printing, I have to admit, but I do enough for it to be messy if I'm not careful. Okay, right. I'm using the VersaFine Clair again to stamp my flowers. I'm just going. I've got, you know, we often get those little tiny stamps with in our stamp packs when we get them, and that you're like, well, I'm never going to use that. That's tiny. It's in the. What am I going to do with it? Well, this is where you use them. It makes life so much easier. You get some really nice finishes. And they just look nice and delicate when you're doing it, which is really good. Some of them stamp better than others, and you'll know as you play which ones you like and which ones you're not so fond of, and then you get sort of going with it. If you get something where you're not happy with it, don't panic, because it can be changed up as you're going along. Just going to look, which one is it? That one. There you go. Put a couple more on. Another one there and there. Just going to have a little bit of ivy to go around my edges. So I've got a bit of green coming in. Just helps, doesn't it? Doesn't matter if you over stamp onto a bit you've already done, because the colours will mingle quite nicely, and that helps everything as it's on its way. And I'll stamp that now with cardstock. You can see that's a really pretty little area where you can then put a sentiment, and so it's quite a nice way to have on a card, which is a nice little thing to do with your ink. You can obviously, if you were doing a Christmas one, you just put snowflakes around the edges, so it's easy to change up for your different styles, but it gives you a different way of doing it. Now, most of the ones that I've shown you, the techniques I've shown you, I actually over stamp then afterwards with a set of stamps, just to finish off, to make it more like a cardstock. So I'll just show you a couple of extra bits before we finish up, and I'll show you what I've done. One thing I wanted to show you before we all went, mainly because we've done so much with pixie powders over the last couple of weeks, what with Heidi's demonstration and bits. I just wanted to show you that pixie powders work fantastically on a jelly plate. Especially if you're gentle in your tapping, so you don't want a lot on there. Okay, you just want a little bit. I'm using one called Fireworks Burst because it has so many colours in it. But if you're very heavy-handed, it will just go black. I'm just going to spritz it lightly. Okay. And then when I turn it over, it will just do a weird and wacky print for you. And you can just take off all your, lift your excess water where you don't want it. If you want to move it around a bit more, you can do. You can put a bit more down. Just take it very carefully back and put it in. And you get this beautiful sensation from your jelly plate with your pixie powders. It looks stunning when it's dry. It gives you a really different finish and a different look to what you get when you use jelly plate, when you use pixie powders. in a normal situation. Right. So there, it's dry now, you can see, which is, it's a nice background. It looks really good. If I put my fairy again, I quite like fairies at the moment. I don't know why, but they are something that I'm rather partial to at the moment. I can sit her here, and there you go. You'll have a magical topper for a card, and so that's quite nice to do. Now I want to just clean up a minute. Every technique we've just done can be done on any size of your jelly plate. It doesn't matter how small or how big. You can use any inks you would like. So you can use your oxides just as much as you can use your distress inks, and you can use or any of them. Even the VersaFine can be used directly onto your jelly plate. It won't stay there. Okay, you'll get a much deeper finish, and it'll be a much stronger finish than what you get with a water-based ink. But just get that going. There we go. It'll give you a very nice print as well. So you can sort of really get yourself some colours. You can really make things all match in if you want to, which is quite nice to do. Just clean that off a minute. I have to put me. I need to put some more. Put me cloth in some water. It's starting to get a bit grubby. It needs rinsing out. Never mind, eh? All right. You can. If I put your ink down again for a minute, I'm just going to put some ink on here just for a second. I'm not going to brayer it this time. I'm just going to leave it there so you've got a bit of ink. You can, if you wish to, if you take a paintbrush, you can draw into your jelly plate with your brush and create patterns. Which will give you a totally different look. Okay. So that will give you a different pattern, give you patterns in a different way. Right, as I do. Going to get a stamp out a second, because I want to show you how you can make it look like you're making your own wallpaper. Now you have to be quite careful with this one, and you need to always ink only the same amount of the stamp up. So it's a good way, it's a good one to do when you sort of only use a block a certain way around, if that makes sense, because then you know that it's only going to work so far. Right, so if I stamp that now, this is all done with the VersaFine Claire. Okay. I'll stamp it again in the same place. Right, print it again. See if you can build it up, and that would create you an ongoing pattern going along. I've put the wrong lid on it. That was me not thinking earlier. There we go. Let's put the right lids on so I don't get confused another day. So that's quite a nice way of using your jelly plate. So I've done that and that. And the last one I want to show you is how to build up your jelly plate to give you to create your backgrounds. So you can give something that is quite muted and not really very in your face, if that makes sense. To make a gentle background. Using just your stamps to do this is quite a nice way of just having a few things about to play with. So we've got a couple of stamps that do backgrounds predominantly. Now I'm not going to put myself any actual ink background on. I'm going to be using different inks to, I'm going to be using the water-based inks just to stamp directly onto my block. Okay, so that's done that one. Let's do the butterfly quickly. Put it in the middle somewhere. Okay. Quite a nice way of making a very delicate background. Okay, can you see that now? Very gentle, but it's a nice way of, if you're not sure when you're stamping to make your backgrounds, if you're a bit heavy-handed, using your jelly plate will help to diffuse what you're stamping, so you won't get it so clear. It'll be a lot more gentle for a background. I hope that's helped those who were wondering what you're going to do with a jelly plate to start with. Inks are the best place to start with because it's less messy, B, it's easier on your cleanup, and you're less likely to damage anything you're using. So it's a really great place to start before you move on to your acrylic paints. If you use your stamps when you come on to acrylic paints, they must go straight into water or be washed straight away, because if you happen to leave acrylic paint to dry on one of your stamps, it's not going to recover. It will be no good to you after that, I'm afraid. So again, I'll just show you the samples and then I will sign off, and I hope you've all enjoyed watching. And keep an eye out for me again. So here we go. This is the one we did first right at the beginning, where we had the two colours we blended together, and then I've overstamped to give me a background. This is the B, where we did the stencil, where we actually put the ink on the stencil and then turn it directly onto the block. So that was like a stencil lift. This is where we added, we did our blended background, then we put the stencil on top and put some colour through, and then we swapped it and lifted it back up. The fairies and the reverse stamping. Again, reverse stamping. It's much easier to see with Mr. Giraffe. This is the original, and this is the one done with a jelly plate. Again, here's that sun background again done, just on a larger scale. And this time I've used grasses. Once I've stamped them on the jelly plate to give me a diffused look, and then I've done it, overstamped it again when it's to come off the jelly plate as the print to give it the foreground. So I hope that's been really helpful to you, and I look forward to seeing you all again. Take care. Bye bye.